I was born in a chamber of warm brine beneath the archive terraces of Leth-Ana, where my people, the Ilyr, hung our memory strands in long curtains and sang our names into one another's skin. That world is ash now, not because of war, because of law. 200 cycles before my hatching, the Heshate burned our upper oceans because our clutch count had risen above the number they allowed. They did it in public. Their ships carved boiling scars across the hemisphere, while every trade frequency carried the judgment. They did not call it punishment. To the Heshate it was correction, a lesson. Proof that species like mine were meant to remain useful, limited, and afraid. We survived because some of us always survive. We adapted to colder seas, darker hatcheries, fewer eggs. We paid tribute in rare salts and living filtration lace. We trained our best scholars for the work the Heshate permitted us: translation, records, compliance, accounting. They trusted us with history because they had already broken our future. They believed that made us harmless. Perhaps it did for a very long time. By the time I entered the archives, my people no longer expected rescue, rebellion, or justice. We measured safety by how predictably we were used. I became a registrar attached to the Tribunal of Peripheral Contact, a wandering bureaucracy that processed newly discovered species unlucky enough to be noticed by the old powers. My task was to make them easy to rule. I listened to their speech, mapped their motives, and reduced them to categories the Heshate and their allies could control. Most were frightened by first contact, a few were proud, all of them learned. The humans were filed under outer margin emergence, minimal strategic concern. That was the first lie, though I did not know it then. They came from the dark beyond the Perseid fringe, from regions the Central Powers dismissed as empty and unimportant. When their envoys arrived at the tribunal station, the first thing I felt was pressure. They moved as if they had been shaped by heavier gravity than ours. Their bodies carried a quiet weight. Their eyes fixed on things with unsettling intensity, as if they seized details and refused to let go. Their speech sounded flat to me at first, but their bodies told another story. Heat shifted under their skin. Their scent changed by the moment. Tiny muscles moved around the jaw and hands. They were never truly still. I misread them at once. Young species from the frontier often arrived with a fragile pride. They had conquered their own local dark and thought that mattered. Then the tribunal would set their borders, classify their technology, seize whatever the elder powers wanted, and explain the penalties for unauthorized growth. Usually there was outrage, sometimes theatrical resistance. Then, after a few generations, submission. Humanity's delegation received its restrictions in silence. Only 6 systems, the tribunal said, though they had clearly explored beyond that. Any new settlement outside the assigned zone would be unlawful encroachment. Several forms of weapons, automation, and fabrication were banned pending review. Human maps of certain outer routes would be surrendered. Human ships passing through central corridors would accept Heshate oversight. No military fortifications above approved levels. No protectorate claims over non-human populations. The lead human was a woman named Elena Vale. She wrote notes by hand on a thin physical sheet, as if she trusted paper more than machines. When the decrees ended, she asked for clarification on inspection schedules, census reports, salvage law, and arbitration procedures if elder patrols entered human settlements. I remember feeling almost disappointed. So this was the species traders had called energetic. They did not protest the theft of their frontier. They did not challenge the insult. They only wanted to understand the machinery that would confine them. I learned later that this was the second lie. For the next 14 cycles, I saw humans often and understood them less each time. They complied too well. Their reports arrived complete. Their tribute was always correctly assessed. Their diplomats were never late. They accepted observers in the systems they were officially allowed to hold. They traded metals, medical polymers, and environmental processors that worked under almost any conditions. And they asked strange questions, not about prestige, not about influence. They asked about repair delays in Heshate fleet yards, about grain transport during famine responses, about how often escort squadrons rotated crews on distant deployments, about response times when several client species rioted in different sectors at once. Their curiosity always settled on strain, delay, and weakness. They were equally interested in history. Human scholars bought damaged military logs, censored occupation records, obsolete language files, and testimony from species too broken to matter. They paid to restore archive vaults no one had funded in centuries. Officially, this was cultural outreach. In truth, they were building a map of every wound the old powers had ever inflicted. At the time, I thought it was sentiment. Young species often collected tragedies before they understood scale. Still, there were inconsistencies. The public record humanity gave the tribunal described a respectable but ordinary rise. Their path from primitive combustion to orbital flight had supposedly taken the expected long ages. Their world had unified gradually. Their spread into interstellar industry followed a normal curve, but truth leaves debris. I found it in ship slang, museum manifests, untranslated education files, careless references in technical exchanges. Once, while indexing a human data package, I found a compressed chronology hidden inside a children's history program. It suggested whole phases of their development had happened far faster than their official record claimed. Not just fast, alarmingly fast. I reported the discrepancy to my superior. He sealed the note and told me to forget it. Why? I asked. Because, he said, if the Heshate believed it, they would cut this species down now. And if they do not believe it, we may all live a little longer before the next correction falls. That was the nearest thing to defiance I had ever heard from an Ilyr elder. Years passed. Human traders appeared at neglected stations where profits were low. Human engineers repaired failing habitats no central power cared enough to save. Human physicians adapted treatment systems for species so alien that even our own records struggled to classify them. They charged little, sometimes nothing. Always they asked questions. They listened to the defeated. That disturbed me more than aggression would have. In our galaxy, power did not listen downward unless it was hunting. Then the punishments began to gather. The first was at Tulmesh. A radiation storm crippled a mixed civilian convoy in disputed space. Human rescue ships were the nearest and moved to help. A Heshate patrol stopped them, claiming authority over the corridor. Clearance was debated, delayed, reviewed, and delayed again while the convoy died inside failing shields. 12,000 dead across 3 species. The Heshate commander later announced that unauthorized humanitarian intervention threatened navigational order. I was present when the humans received the tribunal's ruling that no misconduct had occurred. Elena Vale was older by then, the hair at her temples gone white. She asked only one question. If our ships had obeyed and remained clear, would they still have died? The Heshate adjudicator spread its feeding fronds in amusement. Death is not the issue, authority is. The room went still. Humans have many kinds of stillness. I learned to fear that one. They left without another word. After Tulmesh, human traffic through some central corridors declined. Not enough to alarm anyone, enough to notice. Then came Sark. Sark was not human. It was an Athari lattice state, a drifting civilization built around communal bone reefs under a dim red star. They had accepted human medical support and environmental processors after a fungal blight entered their nursery combs. For that, the Elder Compact accused them of forbidden dependency. A Heshate fleet and its allies entered the system, shattered the orbital reefs, and vented the spawning chambers into vacuum. Official casualty numbers were never released. The Athari counted themselves by growth clusters, not individuals. 17 ancestral clusters died in one day. Human observers were present under diplomatic flag. They were ordered to watch and not interfere. I reviewed the sensor record in the archive vault and had to stop 3 times to purge the taste of terror from my breathing slits. The humans protested on every channel. They did not beg, they recorded. They named the ships, the commanders, the firing sequence. They counted the dead as the dead were being made. When the last nursery reef broke apart, the human observer requested permission to recover remains. Permission was denied. Again, the humans did nothing. That was how it looked. Among the Ilyr, humiliation leaves a physical mark. Our skin dims, appetite fails, memory frays. After Sark, many of us sank into that old gray numbness. Some cursed the humans for watching and failing, others pitied them. I did neither. I had seen how they moved after the slaughter, not broken, contained. That frightened me more than despair. The third outrage was against us. The lower seas of Lethana still held a mineral matrix the Heshate wanted. We had already paid rising quotas for generations. Then a spawning census showed a slight increase in viable hatch numbers, and the tribunal, under Heshate pressure, declared us in demographic breach. The penalty was labor draft, habitat reduction, and seizure of 3 tidal nursery basins. A correction fleet entered orbit. I returned home with the compliance mission because I was Ilyr, and because I knew the archive tunnels beneath the terraces. I told myself I was there as a recorder. In truth, I wanted to witness the final theft of my world. Human representatives came as well, not soldiers. Observers, legal staff, and relief transports held outside the exclusion line. They argued that the census had been falsified. They presented evidence showing the hatch numbers had been altered by remote tampering with our monitoring systems. The tribunal accepted the filing, delayed for 3 hours, and upheld the penalty anyway. Then the seizure began. Heshate descent vessels are not elegant. They fall like organs. Huge black, ribbed with heat, trailing chemical smoke. Their soldiers spread through the shallows, towering 6-limbed forms with sensory crowns open, and drove my people from the nursery pools with sonic pain fields. Eggs were trampled. Memory strands were torn down and burned. When some of our elders refused evacuation, a patrol vehicle passed over them and did not slow. The humans watched from the relief perimeter. I watched them watching us. One of them, a young male liaison whose name I never learned, had tears on his face. By then I knew the chemical signs well enough to recognize them. His fists were clenched so hard his nails cut his palm and blood ran down his skin. Elena Vale touched his arm once briefly, not to comfort him, to stop him. That gesture entered me like a blade. These creatures wanted to fight. They did not. The correction ended. Our nursery basins were taken. 200,000 eggs lost, perhaps more. My brute sibling died in the crush of the evacuation. I carried his memory filaments in my mouth sac for 6 days, because I could not bear to hang them in the archive with the others. Something changed in me then, not trust, not yet, but alignment. My despair had once been smooth from long inheritance. After Lethana, it grew an edge. Soon after, humanity spoke, Not quietly, not inside procedure. Openly, before the Confluence Assembly itself, where the elder powers performed legitimacy for the species they consumed. Human delegates released archived evidence of cullings, forced sterility programs, seized worlds, punitive bombardments, convoy murders, and falsified demographics. They named the Heshate. They named the Vor congruents, who bred subject races for labor. They named the Ket, who stripped entire biospheres bare to deny cover to rebels. They named crimes we had been trained never to say aloud. Then they proposed law. Real sovereignty for developing species. Protected corridors free from seizure. Limits on punitive fleet action. Independent investigation of mass atrocity. The right of mutual defense across species. An end to technological containment and tribute extraction. In the assembly chamber, many subject delegations dimmed with terror. Some fled so they would not be seen listening. I stayed because I was archive staff and because I could not move. The Heshate reply came from all 6 of their speaking throats at once. To human ears, it may have sounded like noise. To mine, it was ancient predatory certainty. The message was simple. Hierarchy was natural. Young species were unstable. Limitation was mercy. Human speech was contamination. I looked at Alina Vale while the denunciations rolled over her. She looked tired. That is the most human thing I can say. Not afraid, not triumphant. Tired, as if she had carried that moment for years and had finally put it down where everyone could see it. I thought they have doomed themselves. I was right, though not in the way I expected. The exemplary punishment came in the inner galaxy, where humanity's official holdings were sparse and exposed. A habitat ring called Covenant Reach orbited a pale giant near 3 major trade lanes. It housed humans, Athari refugees, Ilyr technicians, and several other displaced peoples under formal guarantees. It was not heavily defended. By law, that was the point. The Elder Compact accused Reach of smuggling weapons and sheltering insurgents. No real inquiry followed. A Heshate-led fleet entered the system, jammed all outbound communication, and issued evacuation orders with impossible timing. When human wardens requested inspection rights in civilian corridors, the fleet commander refused. The bombardment began 93 seconds later. I did not witness it directly. Few inside survived long enough to leave a full record. What I saw later came from broken sensor logs, emergency pings, and the final open transmission from the habitat's central school chamber, where hundreds of children and their guardians had sheltered because they believed diplomatic guarantees meant something. They were wrong. The ring broke in 13 places. Atmosphere vented in white streams. Docked civilian ships ignited one after another. A second strike wave targeted lifeboats, not all the lifeboats. Just enough to make the lesson clear. The dead numbered in the millions by human count. For 3 days the assembly filled with prepared justifications. Reach had been unlawful. Reach had concealed dangerous technologies. Reach had confused species boundaries. Reach had required correction to preserve order. The usual language, only larger. I waited for human protest, for grief, for threats, for appeals. Instead, there was silence. At first, I thought their channels were jammed. Then I learned their delegations had left the assembly before the wreckage had even cooled. Human consulates closed. Trade channels went unanswered. Advisors vanished from occupation ministries, hospitals, and salvage depots. Merchant ships cleared docks and filed no destinations. Relief programs halted without explanation. The humans were simply gone. It is difficult to explain what absence means in a civilization built on imposed presence. Under the Elder Order, nothing truly withdrew. Surveillance remained, tribute remained, occupation remained. Even crushed rebels remained, if only as warnings. Humanity had spread itself into just enough forgotten corners of the galaxy that its disappearance left holes everywhere. Empty berths, silent clinics, dark embassies with lights still on and no bodies inside. Requests for human arbitration returned nothing. At fringe stations, workers found sealed warehouses stripped clean overnight. The elder species celebrated. Some said humanity had finally learned its place. Some said it was collapsing from internal division. The Heshate announced a punitive expedition to seize the outer settlements and confiscate forbidden assets. Among subject peoples, rumor moved differently, not fast, deep. Through refugees, smugglers, mechanics, and archive staff who noticed what others ignored. Everywhere in different languages, the same phrase appeared: they are making room. I no longer believed monsters could be overthrown. But I began to suspect the galaxy had done something irreversible. The punitive expedition was enormous. 3 grand fleets, with supporting vassal screens. More than enough, everyone said, to break a peripheral species that had confused outrage with power. Their route would carry them into the outer dark, through thin stars and neglected systems, toward the small human zone the tribunal had recognized years before. I was attached to the archival relay ship Witness of Measures, assigned to record the campaign for legal precedent. That is why I survived to tell any of this. The first shock was geography. Human space was not where it was supposed to be. The recognized systems were there, yes. But beyond them, our charts became lies. Traffic wakes crossed supposedly empty routes. Energy signatures flared from dwarf systems no census had ever claimed. Cold structures drifted in darkness until the fleets approached, then woke all at once with emissions too large to mistake. Shipyards hidden inside comet shells. Buried habitats under dead moons. Vast manufacturing webs threaded through dust clouds like frozen lightning. The outer edge was full, not chaotic, organized. The second shock was speed. The Heshate advanced by standard doctrine, heavy command ships, layered vassal screens, and absolute confidence. Human forces met them first with nothing visible at all. Guidance links failed. Scout wings vanished. Fuel tenders erupted from hits no sensor had predicted. Then the dark lit up. Human warships did not fight like any elder navy. They moved as if distance itself had become unreliable. Strikes landed across impossible gaps in perfectly timed waves. They did not rely on mass alone. They attacked the intervals on which elder doctrine depended. Heshate command ships, built for intimidation and slow domination, found themselves isolated, blinded, cut off from supply, and pierced by weapons that struck before warning systems could agree on what they were seeing. On the Witness of Measures, every analysis team gave different names to what we saw: new drive methods, battle coordination beyond known limits, hidden industry on a scale no legal outer economy should have possessed. The names did not matter. What mattered was this: humanity had spent all those silent years learning exactly where the old powers were slow, proud, and blind. The first Grand Fleet died in 11 hours. Not every hull destroyed, something worse. The fleet ceased to exist as a fighting body. Survivors scattered, and human interdiction groups herded their escape routes away from populated subject worlds with a precision that chilled me more than slaughter would have. They were furious. You could feel it in the relentless tempo of the attack. But their fury had shape. The second and third fleets tried to regroup around a Vor command center. Human strikes hit before retreat orders had fully spread. Then the labor swarms under Vor control turned. Coolant farms sabotaged themselves. Dock crews vented ammunition stores. Enslaved navigators corrupted route data. Rebellion spread behind the human advance like fire through dry fiber. That was when my people chose. Lethana had little left to lose. The seized nursery basins were still under Heshate extraction control, guarded by orbital monitors and local auxiliaries. We had endured because endurance was all the galaxy had ever rewarded. But now the Heshate myth had cracked, and through that crack came something I had almost forgotten: agency. I returned home again, not as a recorder but as a courier. Human command did not order us to rise. They sent options, routes, target maps, jamming windows, and one plain statement in carefully translated Ilyr pulse speech. If you choose to reclaim your seas, we will break orbit for you. We chose. Our sabotage began in the filtration tunnels beneath the extraction towers. We fed false tidal patterns into the monitor systems. We collapsed a gravitic anchor the moment a human strike wing entered low atmosphere under sensor cover. For 16 minutes the sky over Lethana turned white and silver and impossible. Human craft cut the orbital platforms apart so cleanly that whole sections hung motionless before remembering to fall. Heshate descent vessels tried to deploy over the nursery basins and met current mines my brood sibling had designed years earlier, before dying in the evacuation crush. I watched one of the black ships split open above the shallows and spill burning armored forms into the sea they had claimed as inventory. The water took them. When the fighting ended, the basins were ours. Broken, poisoned, and full of wreckage, but ours. I stood knee-deep in surf, while surviving hatch tenders raised salvage nets and wept in colors so bright they hurt to see. Across the galaxy, the pattern repeated. Human fleets drove inward from the Forgotten Rim with impossible speed. Subject species rose behind them, ahead of them, beside them. Some fought with weapons, some with sabotage, some with testimony, opening sealed archives and guiding strikes toward prison worlds, sterilization arrays, tribute vaults, and hidden command sites. The old order did not collapse all at once. Monsters rarely do. The Heshate rallied central reserves. The Vor tried to burn dependent food chains rather than lose them. The Ket poisoned corridor ecologies as they retreated. There were terrible battles I know only through records too vast for one mind. But after the outer fleets were shattered, every move the Elder Powers made met an enemy they had never expected. Not just human strength. The refusal of the galaxy to save them. For the first time in known history, the younger species did not gather around fear. They let the masters stand exposed. When human forces finally entered the Confluence Assembly, they did not bombard it. They cut power to its defense rings, boarded its command centers, and arrested the leaders of the compact alive wherever possible. Trials followed, public evidence, survivor testimony. Records I helped authenticate myself, including Heshate correction edicts reaching farther back than the oldest living Ilyr memory strands. The work was slow, painful, and necessary. Many expected humanity to claim the center then, to become what it had defeated. Instead, they dismantled the machinery that had made such rule possible. Strategic fleets were broken up under joint oversight, culling authority was abolished, territorial caps were voided. Protected corridors were enforced by rotating multispecies commands. Elder species were disarmed and confined where necessary, but not exterminated. No new hierarchy declared itself natural. I did not understand that mercy at first. Part of me still does not. I had wanted the Heshate to feel what we had felt. Some did, in prisons, in testimony chambers, in the long collapse of certainty. But humanity, for reasons I think were forged in whatever furnace made them in their isolated dark, seemed to understand that revenge alone could kill a tyrant and still preserve the shape of tyranny. They wanted something harder. A galaxy where no species would ever again need permission to exist in numbers pleasing to a predator. I am old now. My memory strands hang in a rebuilt archive above waters where our hatcheries are warm again. Children swim beneath terraces grown from living stone instead of salvage foam. Sometimes human delegates visit, quieter than they once were, carrying requests for records of the occupation years so the new law will remember what law once did here. They still unsettle me. Perhaps they always will. There is something in them that looks directly at horror, measures it, and begins building before outrage has even cooled. Not because they do not feel, but because they do. Deeply enough to plan for decades. When I first saw them, I believed they were too new, too small, too far away to matter. Just another young species arriving late to a galaxy where age had hardened into ownership. I was wrong. They had come from the outer dark where no one important was watching, carrying the oldest dangerous idea in existence. That power is not legitimacy, that cruelty is not order, and that something monstrous, even after 1,000 years, can still be broken. Sometimes at evening, the hatchlings ask me what the war looked like when hope returned. They expect brilliance, and there was brilliance. Human fleets erupting from hidden space like waking constellations. Occupation moons going dark one by one. The first uncensored broadcast of the compact's crimes. The nursery basins opening again under free skies. But that is not the image I keep. It is smaller. A human standing at the edge of our stolen sea, while Heshate soldiers crushed our eggs, his hands bleeding from his own restraint. I did not understand it then. I thought I was witnessing helplessness. Now I know I was seeing the narrow line between patience and judgment, where a species decided that, when it finally moved, it would end the nightmare completely. And it did.